Gang targets black woman. At her roadside diner, unaware she is a former Marine. The diner sat on the side of a lonely stretch of highway, its neon sign glowing in the quiet of the evening. It was the kind of place travelers noticed when their stomachs rumbled after a long drive, or when truckers needed a hot cup of coffee to stay awake. Inside, the smell of frying bacon and fresh biscuits mixed with the warmth of brewed coffee. The booths were old but clean. The tables shined from careful wiping, and the floor tiles carried the marks of thousands of footsteps. It was not a fancy place, but it was honest, and people respected that. Behind the counter stood Angela, the owner. Her green blouse and white shorts were simple clothes, but they carried the grace of someone who moved with confidence. She was not loud, nor did she try to draw attention, but there was something in her presence that made people feel safe. Her hair framed her strong face, and her eyes carried both kindness and authority. Those who ate there regularly knew she was fair, hardworking, and never lost her cool even when the diner grew hectic. Angela had built this diner with her own 2 hands after years of saving. She worked morning to night, 7 days a week, turning an abandoned roadside stop into a welcoming place. For her, the diner was more than just business. It was her second chance at peace. She had lived a life before this, one filled with battles and uniforms, but now she wanted nothing more than to serve food, greet travelers, and watch people leave with full stomachs and lighter hearts. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the diner was quiet. A couple of truck drivers sat in one booth speaking softly between bites of meatloaf. At another table, a young couple shared a milkshake, their laughter light. The sound of the jukebox in the corner played a soft tune from decades past. It was peaceful, the kind of peace Angela cherished. Then the door swung open. The sound was not unusual. Doors opened and closed all the time. But this time, the air shifted. A group of men stepped in, their boots heavy against the checkered floor. 5 of them, all broad-shouldered with tattoos running down their arms and black sleeveless shirts that looked more like uniforms than casual wear. They carried themselves with the swagger of men who wanted to be noticed, who wanted others to move out of their way. The first man scanned the diner, his eyes sharp and filled with challenge. The second let out a laugh that echoed too loudly for the small room. The others followed, filling the place with their presence, making the once comfortable customers stiffen in their seats. Angela noticed it immediately. She had felt it before, the sudden change in energy, the weight in the air when danger stepped into a room. She did not rush. She did not panic. Instead, she greeted them the same way she greeted anyone else. "Evening," she said calmly. "Take any seat you like." The men smirked, glancing at one another as if her steady tone was some kind of joke. They slid into 2 booths, their arms stretching across the seats, claiming space that was not theirs. One of them, bald with a scar across his cheek, slammed his hand on the table. "Coffee. All of us. Make it fast," he barked. Angela nodded. "Sure thing." She moved with the same unhurried pace she always did, pouring coffee into thick white mugs and setting them down one by one. The men watched her, some with mocking grins, others with narrowed eyes. One leaned forward, eyeing her carefully as if trying to decide what kind of woman she was. The truck drivers at the other booth lowered their heads. The young couple went silent, their hands frozen around their milkshake glass. The room, once filled with small sounds of comfort, now carried only tension. Angela knew this feeling well. She had been in situations where silence could be more dangerous than noise, yet she did not let her face betray worry. Instead, she asked, "You all want menus?" The man with the scar laughed. "Menus? You think we came here for menus? We'll tell you what we want." His voice was sharp, carrying a threat under the words. Angela met his eyes. "All right then, tell me." The room grew colder. She could feel the customers holding their breath. To them, this looked like trouble, but to Angela it was familiar ground. She had stood across from men more dangerous than these. She had been trained to remain calm under fire, to keep control even when chaos swirled around her. The diner might not be a battlefield, but the rules of control were the same. One of the men, tall and muscular, leaned closer to her. He reached out, grabbing the fabric of her blouse, tugging it slightly. His grip was not gentle. His friends laughed as though this was entertainment. Angela's body did not flinch. She stood steady, her eyes locked on his. "You can let go now," she said, her voice firm, not loud but commanding. The laughter died down a little. The man holding her blinked, surprised by her composure. Most people he was used to would pull away or beg, but she stood firm, like a wall that refused to move. "Don't tell me what to do," he muttered, trying to mask his hesitation with anger. Angela leaned slightly closer, her tone unwavering. "I just did." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that unsettled him. For a moment, the air thickened and everyone in the diner felt the edge of it. The bald man slammed his fist on the table again. "Enough games. You think you're tough? You don't know who you're dealing with." His voice rose, filling the diner with a rough echo. "If you don't treat us right, we'll make sure this little diner of yours doesn't see another morning." Gasps rippled through the room. The young couple clung to each other. The truck driver shifted uncomfortably, wanting to help but too afraid to move. Angela's heart was steady. She looked at the men one by one, seeing not their threats but their weakness, the need to prove themselves, to intimidate, to control. She had seen this before. She had survived it before. She placed her hands gently on the counter, grounding herself. "You're free to eat here," she said slowly, every word carrying deliberate calm. "But you will not bring fear into this diner. Not tonight. Not ever." The gang exchanged looks, some amused, others unsettled. They had walked into this diner expecting to scare, to dominate, but instead they found a woman who stood unshaken. The bald man sneered, trying to mask his growing discomfort. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said. His tone dripped with menace. "We'll kill you if you push us." The words hit the room like a storm. The young couple froze, the girl covering her mouth in shock. The truck drivers stared down, wishing they could disappear. Angela did not move. Her expression did not change. She let the silence stretch, let their threat hang in the air until it felt heavy. Then with a steady voice she said, "You have no idea who I am." The man's smirk faltered. His grip on her blouse loosened. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Angela's gaze was unwavering. Behind it lived years of training, years of discipline, and years of facing dangers far greater than a roadside gang. She had worn the uniform of a Marine. She had walked through fire and returned. And though these men did not know it yet, they had chosen the wrong woman to target. The diner remained frozen in silence, every soul waiting, watching, and holding their breath. And Angela stood calm as stone, ready for whatever would come next. The diner felt smaller as the night pressed forward. The neon light outside flickered through the blinds, breaking the room into strips of light and shadow. Every customer sat frozen, trying to disappear into their seats while the gang filled the space with their restless movements. The smell of coffee lingered, but it no longer felt warm and welcoming. Instead, it was heavy, like the air before a storm. Angela stood near their table, her shoulders squared and her gaze fixed on the man who had threatened her. She knew what fear looked like on others, but she also knew how quickly fear could spread if she gave in to it. That was something she refused to do. The man with the scar leaned back in his booth, his eyes narrowing as though measuring her. He seemed confused by her calm, as if he expected her to beg or run. He tapped his fingers on the table, each sound sharp in the silence. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice but making sure everyone in the diner could hear. "You think you're special, don't you? A little diner owner out in the middle of nowhere, acting like she's untouchable. But this is our world, and in our world, people listen when we speak." Angela listened without flinching. His words were meant to trap her, meant to force her into acknowledging his power. But she did not move, did not give him the satisfaction of trembling. Instead, she spoke in the same steady tone she had used before. "You came in here as customers. I treat every customer with respect. But respect is a two-way street. If you want to act like this, then you're not welcome." A ripple of disbelief crossed the room. The truck drivers looked at one another in shock, their mouths opening slightly as if to say something, but no words came. The young couple gripped each other's hands tighter, their eyes darting from Angela to the gang and back again. Nobody had ever spoken to these men like that. Not here, not in this town. The tall one with muscles covering his arms slammed his fist on the table so hard the coffee mugs rattled and spilled over. "You don't tell us where we're welcome," he barked. "We decide that." He stood up, towering over Angela, his shadow stretching across her. His chest puffed with arrogance, expecting his size to intimidate her. Angela tilted her head up slightly, meeting his eyes without hesitation. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority that she had once used to command Marines in training grounds and combat zones. "Sit back down." The room held its breath. The man blinked, surprised by the order. He had expected pleading, maybe shouting, but not a command that cut through his bravado. He hesitated for just a second, then forced a laugh to cover it. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. He leaned closer, so close that his breath touched her face. "But guts don't keep you alive when you're outnumbered." Angela could feel the fear building in the customers, but she refused to let it touch her. She remembered nights in far-off places. Nights when her unit had been surrounded. Nights when survival depended on staying calm and making every move count. Fear was a weapon, and she had learned long ago never to hand it over. "I've been outnumbered before," she said softly, her eyes steady. "And I'm still here." Her words struck harder than any fist. The man blinked again, thrown off by the quiet confidence in her tone. He wanted her to shake. He wanted her to crumble. Instead, she stood like steel. At the booth behind him, another gang member, the bald one with the chain around his neck, shouted, "She's not scared, man. Look at her. She thinks she's tougher than us." He slammed his hand against the seat. "We can break this place down in minutes. We can break her down in seconds." The laughter of the other men followed, but it was not as loud as before. There was a thin layer of unease in it now, as if they were trying to convince themselves that what they said was true. Angela noticed it, the small crack in their confidence. She had seen that before too. Men who relied on noise and numbers to cover the weakness inside. Angela turned slowly, addressing the entire group. "You say you can break me. You say you can break this place. But strength is not about how loud you shout or how many fists you throw. Real strength is what stays steady when everything else tries to shake it. And right now all of you are shaking." The words landed with unexpected weight. The young woman at the couple's booth whispered something to her partner, her eyes wide. The truck drivers sat straighter, no longer just silent watchers but witnesses to something they did not fully understand yet. The gang members shifted in their seats. One scoffed, trying to laugh it off. Another muttered something under his breath. But their leader, the scar-faced man, leaned forward, his expression tighter now. "You talk too much," he hissed. "You don't know who we are. We own this road. We own this town. People do what we say because they know better." Angela let him finish. Then she leaned just slightly closer, her eyes sharp. "I know exactly who you are. You're men who believe fear makes you powerful. You've probably scared a lot of people into silence. But I'm not one of them. And here's the truth, you don't own me. And you don't own anyone who decides they won't bow down." The silence that followed was deep, heavy enough that even the humming of the neon sign outside seemed distant. For the first time, the leader's confidence wavered. He opened his mouth to reply but closed it again, unable to find words that matched her resolve. The tall, muscular man, embarrassed by his hesitation, tried again to intimidate her. He stepped closer, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. But Angela's posture remained calm, her feet firmly planted, her eyes unwavering. The closer he came, the more obvious it became that she was not moving back. At that moment, Angela thought of her training, of the countless drills where she had been forced to hold her ground under pressure, where she had been taught to see through the bluster of an opponent and find their weakness. She saw it now, not in their muscles, not in their numbers, but in their eyes. None of them truly believed they had control anymore. They were louder, angrier, but beneath it they were uncertain. The young couple finally exhaled, their fear turning into something else. Admiration. The truck drivers exchanged glances, one of them whispering, "She's not even breaking a sweat." Angela stood steady, her voice calm but commanding as she spoke again. "You walked into my diner tonight thinking you'd take whatever you wanted. But you've already lost because you thought fear was stronger than respect. You were wrong. And sooner or later you'll realize you chose the wrong place and the wrong person." The gang leader clenched his jaw, his fists tightening on the table. He wanted to strike, wanted to end the humiliation. But for some reason his hand did not rise. Something in her presence stopped him. Something he could not name but could feel in his bones. The diner was still tense, but the balance had shifted. For the first time it was not the gang in control. It was Angela. She had not raised her voice, she had not lifted a hand, but her strength filled the room in a way their threats never could. And though the night was far from over, everyone inside the diner could feel it, the tide was turning. Angela stood in her diner, her body steady and her eyes locked on the men who thought they could break her. On the outside she looked calm, but inside her mind she had already gone back to a different time, a different place. It was almost like her memory had been pulled open by the tension, reminding her who she truly was and where she had come from. To the gang members, she was just a woman standing alone in a roadside diner. They did not see the years of training, the battles she had fought, or the pain she had endured. But Angela remembered it all, and in that memory was the source of her strength. Years ago, before she ever dreamed of owning a diner, Angela had worn the uniform of a United States Marine. She had enlisted when she was young, barely out of high school, with a determination that few understood. Many of her friends had chosen safer paths, working small jobs, going to college, or staying close to their families. Angela chose something different. She wanted to prove to herself that she was capable of more, that she could face challenges most people would run from. The first weeks of boot camp were the hardest. She remembered the early mornings before the sun even rose, the sound of the drill instructors shouting, the endless runs with heavy packs cutting into her shoulders, and the moments when her body felt like it could not go on. She remembered standing in formation, sweat dripping down her back as the instructors pushed them harder than they thought possible. Many cried. Some gave up. But Angela stood firm. Each day she reminded herself that fear and exhaustion were only temporary, but quitting would last forever. One night in particular stayed with her. They had been out on a grueling training exercise in the cold rain, their clothes soaked, their boots heavy with mud. She remembered the way her legs trembled, the ache in her arms from carrying her gear, and the whispers from others who thought they could not go on. She had felt the weight of doubt pressing down on her too. For a moment she wanted to lay down and close her eyes, but something deep inside her whispered louder than the pain. Keep moving. Step by step she kept going, and by the end of that night, she realized she had discovered something important, that her body could endure far more than her mind believed, and that true strength came from refusing to surrender when every part of you wanted to quit. Those lessons carried her into active duty. She served overseas, in deserts where the heat burned through her skin, and in towns where every corner carried the threat of danger. She saw things that would stay with her forever. Families caught in conflict, friends who never made it home, long nights where the sound of gunfire echoed in the distance. It was not glory. It was not adventure. It was survival, discipline, and responsibility. And through it all, Angela learned to keep her heart steady. There were moments of fear, yes, but she never let fear control her. She had stood guard in the dark, listening for movements that might never come. She had walked into unknown streets with her head high. Even when her chest pounded with adrenaline, she had learned to lead others, to speak calmly when everything around them screamed chaos. Her fellow Marines trusted her because she never panicked. She never lost focus, and she never abandoned anyone who needed her. One day, during a mission that turned unexpectedly violent, Angela's unit was caught in crossfire. The sound of bullets was deafening, dust and debris clouding the air. She remembered crouching low, her heart hammering, her weapon steady in her hands. One of her comrades had been hit, pinned down in the open. Fear surged through the group, the kind that could freeze men in place. But Angela did not freeze. She moved. Crawling through dirt, ignoring the danger, she reached him, dragged him back to safety, and shielded him until the medics arrived. Later, others would tell her she was reckless, that she could have been killed. But Angela never saw it that way. She only saw someone who needed her, and she had chosen to act. That moment defined her. It was proof that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand firm in spite of it. Years later, when her service ended, Angela came home with scars that were not visible but were carved deep inside her spirit. She had lost friends. She had carried the weight of decisions that no one outside the military could ever truly understand. At first, civilian life felt strange. The quiet of small towns and the chatter of normal days felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's world. She struggled to find her place again, but then she saw the empty building on the side of the highway, its broken windows and dusty counters. She saw possibility. That diner became her mission. Piece by piece, she restored it. She scrubbed the walls, replaced the floors, painted the counters, and turned it into something new. She poured her discipline into it the same way she once poured it into her service, and slowly people came. Truck drivers, travelers, couples on road trips, families in need of a meal. They came because Angela's food was good, but they stayed because of her presence. Her quiet strength made the place feel safe, even though most people never knew why. Now, standing in her diner with the gang glaring at her, Angela's past flowed through her like steel. Every memory of pain, every night of exhaustion, every moment when she had chosen courage over fear, it was all with her. The men in front of her saw only a woman they thought they could intimidate. They had no idea that she had faced fire, that she had faced death, that she had buried friends and still kept walking. Compared to those battles, their threats were small, like shadows trying to frighten someone who had already lived through storms. Angela's eyes did not waver as she looked at them. She could almost hear her drill instructor's voice echoing in her memory, shouting words that once burned into her. Never back down. Never give them the ground. Those words had carried her through deserts, through firefights, through nights where she thought she might not survive. And now they carried her through this moment. The gang laughed and postured, but deep down she could see it. The cracks. The doubt. They were loud because they were afraid of silence. They were aggressive because they were afraid of weakness. And Angela knew with every fiber of her being that she had already faced men stronger, meaner, and more dangerous than them. She had survived, and she had built a life after. Nothing they did tonight could take that away from her. As the minutes stretched, the customers in the diner could feel something change. They did not know Angela's past. They did not know she had been a Marine. But they could sense that this was not just an ordinary woman. Her calmness, her strength, her refusal to bend under the weight of the gang's threats, it was something rare, something powerful. And while the gang tried to make themselves bigger, louder, and more dangerous, Angela only grew steadier, like a mountain rooted deep in the earth. The night was far from finished. The gang was not done testing her, but in her heart, Angela already knew how this story would end. She had not survived all she had survived only to surrender now. And whether they realized it yet or not, those men were about to discover the truth. They had chosen the wrong woman to target. The diner's lights buzzed softly, the neon outside humming like a nervous heartbeat. Inside, the tension had settled so thick it was almost alive. Every customer in the room knew they were sitting in the middle of something bigger than themselves. Some clutched their cups of coffee without drinking. Others stared at their plates without eating, while the young couple in the corner sat with wide eyes, barely breathing. It was as if everyone was waiting for something to break. The gang was restless. They had come in expecting an easy night. Food, laughs, maybe a chance to scare a few people and remind the town who held the power. But they had not expected Angela. They had not expected a woman who stood in front of them without trembling, who spoke with calm authority that cut through their noise. It unsettled them in ways they did not want to admit. And so they grew louder, more reckless, trying to cover the cracks that were starting to show. One of them, the youngest of the group, grabbed a bottle of ketchup from the table and hurled it across the diner. It smashed against the wall, splattering red against the white tiles. The young couple jumped, the girl letting out a sharp cry before covering her mouth. The boy pulled her close, his face pale. The truck drivers tightened their jaws, glancing at each other as though asking silently if they should step in. But they stayed seated, knowing full well that stepping into a fight with this gang could cost them more than they were ready to give. Angela did not flinch when the bottle shattered. She did not even turn her head toward the mess on the wall. Instead, she looked directly at the man who had thrown it. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "Are you done?" The man blinked, caught off guard by her question. He had expected her to shout, to scold, to panic, but she acted as though he were a child throwing a tantrum. "What did you just say?" he snarled. "You heard me," Angela said. "Are you done acting out?" Laughter broke out from the others, though it was strained, almost forced. "She's got a mouth, doesn't she?" one of them said, shaking his head. "You think this is a game, lady? You think you can talk to us like that and walk away?" Angela's eyes moved across the group slowly, like a teacher scanning a room of unruly students. "You walked into my diner thinking you could own it for a night," she said. "But this place isn't yours. It's mine. And the rules here don't change just because you say so." The bald man with the chain around his neck stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. He stomped over to the counter, his fists clenched. He leaned in close, his face inches from Angela's. His voice was low and dangerous. "Do you really want to see what happens if we decide to trash this place? If we decide to trash you?" Angela leaned forward slightly, closing the space between them so that only he could hear. Her words were quiet, but they carried the weight of unshaken confidence. I've faced people who were ready to kill. Do you think I'm afraid of boys playing tough in a diner? The bald man froze, his eyes narrowing. He wanted to explode, to prove her wrong, but something in her gaze stopped him. It was the way she looked through him, not at him, like she had already measured his soul and found it lacking. For a second, his chest rose and fell with the effort of holding back. Then he turned sharply, slamming his hand against the counter in frustration before storming back to his booth. The customers exhaled quietly, though none dared to speak. They were watching something they had never seen before, a woman who refused to break, even when the threat was pressed directly against her. The leader, the scar-faced man, leaned forward again, his patience wearing thin. His voice was quieter now, more dangerous because of the effort it took to control it. You're playing a dangerous game. You think your little speech makes you strong, but strength is what happens when no one can stop you, and right now you're alone. Angela's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. Alone doesn't scare me, she replied. The words unsettled him more than any threat could have. He had built his power on numbers, on outshouting and outmuscling those weaker than him. But this woman stood in front of him without raising her voice, without raising her fists, and somehow she felt stronger than all of them combined. To break the silence, one of the men jumped up and grabbed a chair, lifting it high as if to smash it against the floor. Gasps filled the diner, the young woman in the booth covering her eyes. But before he could bring it down, Angela's voice rang out sharply. Put it down. The command was crisp, commanding, and absolute. It was not a plea. It was not a request. It was the voice of someone who had given orders in life and death situations, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. The man froze, the chair still raised above his head. For a long second he stood there, trembling between pride and obedience. Then slowly, almost against his own will, he lowered the chair and set it back on the floor. The other gang members stared at him in disbelief. "What are you doing, man?" one of them demanded. "She's not the boss of you." But deep down they all felt it, she was. Not by force, not by violence, but by presence. Her authority was undeniable, and even they could not escape it. Angela stepped back slightly, giving the man space. "Thank you," she said simply, as though he had just done something polite rather than backed away from destruction. The leader slammed his hand on the table again, trying desperately to hold on to the control that was slipping from his grasp. "Enough of this," he growled. "We're not here to listen to you talk." Angela looked at him, her expression calm but unyielding. "Then leave." The word hit like a stone dropped into still water. The customers stared at her, their jaws slack. The gang members exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had expected her to challenge them so directly, to demand their exit without a shred of fear. The leader sneered, though his eyes betrayed doubt. "You really think you can make us?" Angela didn't answer with words. Instead, she simply stood taller, her shoulders back, her eyes steady. She said nothing because she did not have to. Her silence spoke louder than anything else. It said she was not moving, not bending, not breaking. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The young couple leaned into each other, unable to look away. The truck driver sat straighter now, admiration glinting in their eyes. They had seen strong men in their lives, but this was different. This was strength of spirit. Strength that did not shout or swing fists, but strength that stood like stone and could not be moved. The gang shuffled in their seats, their bluster fading. The scar-faced leader's jaw clenched as he searched for a way to win back control. But for the first time since walking into the diner, he felt something he hated. Hesitation. Angela looked at him one last time and spoke with finality. "You wanted to bring fear into this place, but you failed. This is my diner. And as long as I stand, fear will never live here." The room went still again, but this time the power did not belong to the gang. It belonged to her. And though they had not yet admitted defeat, everyone could feel it. The balance had shifted. The gang was no longer in control. Angela was. The silence in the diner was alive, pulsing with the kind of tension that made every small sound echo louder than it should. The drip of spilled coffee sliding down the side of a mug, the creak of a chair shifting as a customer adjusted nervously, the faint hum of the jukebox in the corner, all of it felt sharp, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The gang members who had swaggered in with loud voices and careless laughter were now restless in a different way. They leaned back, arms crossed, glancing at one another, searching for someone to act first. Their confidence had begun to leak, but none of them wanted to admit it. Angela stood near the counter, her stance calm but ready, the kind of posture that did not invite trouble, but promised it would be answered if it came. She had learned long ago that real authority was not about noise or aggression. It was about control. Control of your body, your words, your breathing, even your silence. In the Marines, she had been taught that panic spread like fire. But calm spread too, and she had chosen which one to ignite. She looked at the scar-faced leader, who sat with his jaw tight, drumming his fingers against the table. He wanted to strike, she could see it. He wanted to end the doubt building among his men, to reclaim the control that had slipped from him. But Angela's presence had dug into him like a thorn. He could not understand why her stillness made him uneasy. He had broken stronger-looking people before, but she was different. The young couple in the corner whispered quietly, their eyes glued to Angela. The boy shook his head as if he could not believe what he was witnessing. The girl's eyes were wide, admiration mixing with fear. The truck drivers sat with their arms folded now, their earlier nervousness shifting into something else, a quiet respect. Finally, one of the gang members tried to break the stillness. He stood, his boots thudding against the floor, and walked toward the counter. His movements were meant to be intimidating, but Angela had seen men twice his size and 10 times his anger crumble under the weight of real fear. She tracked his steps with her eyes unblinking. He leaned against the counter, inches away from her face. His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. "You think just standing there makes you strong?" He sneered. "I could break you with one hand." Angela didn't move. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then in a voice low but precise, she said, "If you could, you already would have." The man blinked, his words caught in his throat. He wanted to answer, but she had sliced through his bluff with a single sentence. The other gang members laughed nervously, trying to keep up their image. But the laughter carried no real power now. Angela straightened slightly, her voice steady but firm, the kind of voice that had once carried across training fields and into combat. "You think strength is in your fists, but strength is knowing when not to use them. Strength is discipline, and right now you have none." Her words hung in the air. They were not just words, they were a mirror, showing the gang exactly what they were. Loud, reckless, unstable. For a second, even the scar-faced leader looked away, as if unwilling to meet her gaze. The man at the counter clenched his jaw, his hand twitching as if he might reach for something. Angela's eyes narrowed slightly. In a calm, measured movement, she shifted her stance. It was subtle. Most in the diner might not have noticed, but it was enough. One foot slid slightly back, her shoulders angled just so, her weight balanced perfectly. It was the kind of movement that spoke of training, of readiness, of someone who had been in fights where hesitation meant death. The man noticed. His eyes flicked down to her posture, then back up. He realized she was prepared for him, not just in spirit but in skill. His bravado faltered. He stepped back slightly, his attempt at intimidation dissolving before everyone's eyes. Angela did not pursue the moment. She did not gloat. She simply returned to stillness, her body loose but steady, her gaze calm. She had no need to prove anything more. She had shown them without violence that she was not to be underestimated. The customers saw it too. The young woman in the booth whispered, "She knows how to fight." Her partner nodded, his jaw slack. The truck drivers exchanged looks that spoke volumes. They recognized the signs, the way she moved like a soldier. They had not known her story, but they could guess now. This was no ordinary woman running a diner. This was someone forged in places they could only imagine. The leader slammed his fist down again, desperate to shatter the spell she was casting over the room. "Enough of this," he roared. "You think you're better than us? You think you can stand there and make us look weak?" His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying the truth he did not want to face. Angela turned her head toward him slowly, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I don't need to make you look weak," she said. "You're doing that yourselves." The words landed harder than any punch. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then one of the gang members cursed under his breath, pushing his plate away in frustration. Another shifted uncomfortably, no longer meeting Angela's eyes. The scar-faced leader's chest rose and fell as he tried to summon his anger back, but it was slipping through his fingers. He could feel it. The respect of his men, the fear of the customers, all of it was no longer his. It was hers, and he hated it. Angela let the silence stretch, let them sit in their discomfort. She had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon. People revealed themselves in silence, their impatience, their fear, their weakness. She waited, calm, composed, unshaken. The young couple leaned closer to each other, whispering softly. "She's not even afraid," the boy said. The girl nodded, her eyes wide. "She's stronger than all of them." The truck drivers finally spoke, one of them muttering just loud enough for the other to hear. "I'd follow her anywhere." Angela heard none of this, but she didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the room, the way the air itself seemed to lean toward her. The gang had come in thinking they would dominate the space with noise and threats. Instead, the space now bent around her stillness. The leader's face twisted, torn between rage and something he could not name. Respect, maybe, though he would never admit it. "This isn't over," he hissed, standing abruptly. His chair scraped across the floor, the sound sharp and jarring. His men looked up at him, unsure whether to follow. Angela's eyes did not leave his. "It is if you walk out that door," she said quietly. Her calm struck him harder than his own fury. He wanted to fight, wanted to reassert control, but something inside him, something he had not felt in a long time, stopped him. He knew that if he pushed further, it would not end the way he wanted. The room was still balanced on a knife's edge. The gang had not yet left, but the tide had turned completely. Fear no longer lived in the diner. Respect had taken its place, and it flowed toward Angela. The diner felt like a stage where everyone was waiting for the final act. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting a dull glow through the blinds. The gang had started the night as the loudest force in the room, but now their energy was unraveling. Their threats no longer landed. Their laughter no longer felt strong. They had tried intimidation, they had tried destruction, and still Angela stood steady, untouched by their noise. The scar-faced leader was still on his feet, fists clenched at his sides, his chest rising and falling quickly. His men looked to him for direction, but their eyes carried doubt now. The youngest of them glanced toward the door as if considering leaving altogether. Another rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding Angela's gaze as if he could no longer hold it. They had come in as predators, but now they looked more like men who wanted to escape a fire they could not control. Angela did not chase them. She did not raise her voice or demand obedience. She simply stood in the center of her diner like a fixed point in a storm. Her breathing was slow and even, her posture unshaken. Every second she stayed calm made their anger look smaller, their threats more hollow. The leader slammed his fist on the counter, the sound echoing through the diner. "You think this is over? You think you scared us?" His voice cracked slightly, and though he tried to cover it with a growl, everyone in the room heard it. "We don't back down. We never back down." Angela's eyes met his. "Backing down is not the same as walking away," she said evenly. "Walking away takes more strength than you know." The words hung in the air like smoke. The customers shifted, glancing at one another, realizing the truth in them. The young couple leaned closer, whispering softly, their fear replaced by awe. The truck drivers nodded almost unconsciously, like men who recognized real authority when they saw it. The bald man with the chain shook his head, trying to laugh. "She's playing with our heads, man. That's all this is. She's nothing." His voice was louder than it needed to be, and that alone betrayed his uncertainty. Angela turned her gaze on him, steady and direct. "If I were nothing, you wouldn't be shouting." The diner went silent again. The bald man's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the others as if begging for backup, but none of them spoke. The leader stepped forward, trying to reclaim his authority. "You don't know who we are," he said, his voice quieter now but sharp. "You don't know what we can do." Angela tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I know exactly what you can do," she replied. "You can scare people who already feel weak. You can break things that don't fight back, but you don't know what to do when someone stands up to you. That's why you're still here, because you don't know how to handle me." The customers watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anyone speak to the gang this way. It was not just the words, but the way Angela delivered them. Calm, firm, with no hesitation. Every sentence landed like a hammer, breaking down the gang's image piece by piece. The youngest of the group finally broke. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his jacket, and slid out of the booth. Without looking at anyone, he walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled as he pushed it open, and then he was gone into the night. The rest of the gang shifted uncomfortably. The leader's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as if he might lash out at his own man for leaving, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Angela watched him steadily. "That's one," she said quietly. Her voice was not mocking, but it carried a weight that pressed on the rest of them. One by one, the cracks deepened. The man who had nearly smashed the chair earlier stood suddenly, his face tight with frustration. He muttered something to himself and moved toward the door. Another followed, shaking his head. Their exit was quick, but every step they took was an admission of defeat. The customers sat stunned, their eyes wide as they watched the once dominant gang shrink before their eyes. Now only two remained: the scar-faced leader and the bald man with the chain. The leader's face burned with humiliation, his pride screaming at him to stay, to fight, to prove something. But deep down he felt the truth. He had already lost. Not to fists or weapons, but to something stronger: resolve. Angela took a slow step closer, her voice calm. "It's time to leave." The leader stared at her, his jaw tight, his chest heaving. For a long moment the room was frozen, every customer waiting to see what he would do. His pride battled with his fear, his image battled with the truth. Finally, with a sharp inhale, he turned abruptly toward the door. He pushed past the bald man, muttering something low, and the bell jingled again as he left. The bald man lingered for a moment longer, looking at Angela as if searching for something: anger, fear, anything he could use to hold on to. But all he saw was calm strength. His shoulders slumped slightly. Without another word, he followed his leader out the door. The diner was silent, the only sound the fading hum of engines as the gang's motorcycles started outside. Slowly, the noise of them pulling away filled the night, then disappeared down the empty road. Inside, the silence stretched. Nobody moved at first, as if they were afraid to break the moment. Then slowly the young couple let out a shaky laugh of relief. The girl covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. The boy shook his head, his voice trembling. "I can't believe what just happened." The truck drivers leaned back in their seats, exhaling deeply. One of them chuckled, a low, amazed sound. "I've seen a lot in my years on the road," he said, "but I've never seen anything like that." Angela stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the door where the gang had left. She let her breathing slow, let the weight of the moment settle. Then quietly she turned back to the counter, picked up a rag and began to wipe the spilled coffee from the table. Her movements were simple, almost ordinary, but to everyone watching, they carried a message: that peace had returned, that fear had been driven out, and that life could go on. The customers began to move again, slowly at first, then with growing energy. The young couple walked up to Angela, their voices full of gratitude. "You were amazing," the girl said, her eyes shining. "I don't know how you stayed so calm." Angela gave a small smile. "Sometimes calm is the strongest thing you can be." The boy nodded, still staring at her in awe. "You didn't even flinch. They didn't stand a chance against you." Angela shook her head gently. "It wasn't about them. It was about making sure no one else in here was afraid." The truck drivers raised their mugs in a quiet salute from across the room. One of them said, "You've got more courage than 10 men put together." Angela did not bask in the praise. She only nodded, continuing to clean the counter, her face calm. She had not done it for recognition. She had done it because that was who she was, who she had become through years of training, sacrifice, and resilience. The diner was alive again, the fear replaced by murmurs of amazement and admiration. The customers knew they would never forget what they had seen that night. The story would spread, carried by truckers down highways, whispered by young couples to their friends, told in towns nearby. The story of a roadside diner where a woman stood against fear and won. Angela finished cleaning, set the rag down, and looked around her diner. It was still standing. Her customers were safe, and she was exactly where she belonged. The night had finally settled back into silence after the roar of motorcycle engines faded into the distance. The diner, once filled with heavy tension, was now breathing again. The young couple had stopped trembling. The truck drivers sat upright with a look of calm pride, and even the air itself felt lighter. But beneath the relief was something deeper, a quiet awe that lingered in the faces of everyone who had been there to witness what had unfolded. They had seen fear lose. They had seen strength stand tall without fists or shouting. They had seen Angela. Angela herself did not bask in the moment. She moved through the diner with the same steady pace as always, clearing tables, refilling coffee cups, and checking on the young couple as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Her posture was the same, her eyes calm, her voice steady. To her, there was no need for a victory lap. She had done what needed to be done, kept her customers safe, kept fear out of her diner. That was enough. But the others could not let it pass so easily. The young woman from the corner booth approached the counter with her partner, her hands still trembling slightly. "You were incredible," she said softly. I thought they were going to hurt you." Or worse, Angela gave her a small smile. "They didn't." The young woman blinked, surprised by the simplicity of her answer. "But how? You didn't even look scared, you just stood there and they couldn't do anything to you." Angela wiped down the counter, her eyes thoughtful. "Fear is only as strong as you allow it to be," she said. "They expected me to be afraid, and when I wasn't, they lost." The young man nodded slowly as though committing the words to memory. "I'll remember that," he said. The truck drivers added their voices, their deep tones carrying across the room. "I've hauled freight across this country for 30 years, one of them said. "I've stopped in places where I didn't feel safe. But I'll tell you this is the safest diner I've ever stepped into. And it's because of you." Angela inclined her head, not dismissive but humble. She had never sought praise. In her mind, she had simply done what she was trained to do: protect, endure, and stand firm. When the customers eventually left, they did so with grateful words and promises to return. The young couple lingered a little longer, the girl squeezing Angela's hand with tears in her eyes before leaving. And when the truck drivers finally stepped out into the night, one of them turned back and said, "You've got a story now, ma'am. And believe me, it'll travel farther than this road." He was right. Word did spread. Over the next few weeks, people began to stop by the diner not just for food but for the story. Truckers carried it down highways, retelling it at rest stops and gas stations. Locals whispered it in town, adding details they had heard from those who were there. A group of men had tried to bring fear into a small roadside diner. But a woman, alone, calm, unshaken, had stood against them and won without ever raising a hand. Some called her brave. Others called her a hero. But Angela never used those words for herself. She still worked the same long hours, cooking, serving, cleaning, and greeting each customer with the same steady warmth. For her, the diner was still just her home, her mission, her place of peace. But the customers who came in now looked at her differently. They saw not just a diner owner, but someone stronger than they could put into words. They watched the way she moved, calm, precise, steady, and felt comforted by it. For travelers who were far from home, her presence gave them a sense of safety they rarely found on lonely highways. For locals, she became a reminder that even in a world full of noise and fear, dignity and courage could still win. One afternoon, a boy no older than 16 came into the diner with his mother. They sat at the counter, and while his mother ordered, the boy stared at Angela with wide eyes. When she placed their plates in front of them, he finally spoke. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you really face down those men?" Angela paused, then nodded slightly. "I stood my ground," she said. The boy's face lit with admiration. "I want to be like that," he said. "Not afraid." Angela looked at him for a moment, then leaned slightly closer. "Being strong doesn't mean you're never afraid," she told him. "It means you don't let fear decide for you." The boy nodded, the words sinking deep. His mother gave Angela a look of gratitude, one that said she understood the importance of what her son had just heard. Moments like that became common. People came not just to eat, but to sit in the presence of someone who had faced down fear and proven that strength did not have to be loud or violent. Families brought their children, hoping they would learn by watching her. Travelers stopped to ask for her story, and though Angela never told it with pride, she told it with truth, simple, direct, and unembellished. Her diner became more than a stop on the road. It became a symbol, a place where courage lived, where fear was not welcome, and where people left not just with full stomachs, but with something heavier, a piece of strength to carry with them. The gang never returned. Perhaps they knew the story had grown too large, that their image had been broken beyond repair, or perhaps they had finally realized that fear could not rule everywhere. Either way, They disappeared from that stretch of road, leaving behind only the tale of the night they had been undone by one woman's calm. Angela rarely thought about them anymore. When she closed the diner each night, she wiped down the counters, stacked the chairs, and turned off the neon sign with the same steady hand. She did not dwell on victories or defeats. She simply lived each day as she had always chosen to. One step at a time, one choice at a time, refusing to give fear a seat at her table. And yet in quiet moments she sometimes remembered her days as a Marine. She remembered the voices of her comrades, the weight of her gear, the endless drills under the hot sun. She remembered the losses too, the faces she had carried with her across years, and she realized that all of it, the discipline, the pain, the resilience, had led her here, to a roadside diner, to a night when fear came knocking, and to the strength that allowed her to protect what she had built. To others, she was a former Marine, a diner owner, a woman who had faced down a gang. To herself, she was simply Angela, someone who had chosen peace after war, but who would never stop standing tall when it mattered. And so the story of Angela and her diner lived on, not in newspapers or headlines, but in the voices of those who carried it forward. It became a tale told to children about the power of calm, a reminder to travelers that courage could live in the quietest of places, and a truth to anyone who felt small or powerless, that fear only ruled if you allowed it, and that dignity could stand taller than any threat. Late one night, weeks after the incident, Angela stood at the door of her diner, locking it for the evening. The highway stretched out before her, quiet under the stars. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. Then she turned, back to the diner, its sign glowing gently in the dark, a small place built with her own hands, standing strong against the world. She smiled faintly to herself and whispered, "Still standing." And with that, she walked inside, ready for tomorrow.